What is going on, guys? My name is Josh Keatley, and today I got a very exciting video for you. Something that I spent many hours, days working on. Now, I wanted to figure out who that knight was in the wolf paintings. There's definitely some type of story behind it, more than meets the eye. I knew there was, so I did a little research, and this is what I found. So if you go into Samantha's room, you see a book titled Fafnir and Sigurd. Now, the story of Fafnir and Sigurd is a very interesting story. It has to do with Norse mythology, the saga of the Volsungs, or the Volsanga saga. And we've seen Norse mythology before in Zombies. You think of origins, the giants that walked around that you could go inside. Their names were Freya, Odin, and Thor. And there was a fourth giant robot that was downed. Remember that big giant hand that we had to shoot? So not sure what the name of that giant robot was. But why Norse mythology is in Zombies? Because Zombies has a lot to do with Hitler and the Nazis. And Hitler really believed in Norse mythology. He believed in it like it was real. Like, Christians would believe. And, the God of the Bible, Hitler believed. And a lot of the Nazis believed in Norse mythology in the exact same way. That's why we see Norse mythology in Zombies. So Fafnir acquired a whole bunch of treasure by killing his own father. And his father got this gold from Odin, because when Loki and Odin were walking through the forest, they killed an otter, which was Fafnir's brother. He thought it was just a regular otter, and Odin felt bad because Loki killed this guy's son. So he gave Fafnir's father a crap ton of gold and a ring that was cursed. So after his father gets all this gold, Fafnir kills him, and he now has a crap ton of gold. Everybody in the family can basically shapeshift, and Fafnir shapeshifts into a dragon to protect his gold. Now Sigurd, he is the main character in this entire story. He is the knight prince that slays Fafnir, the almighty dragon. That's what Sigurd is famous for. And you think of this map, Der Eisendrache, is all about dragons. This is a very interesting story. It has to do with so much stuff. Now, who the knight is in the painting, let's go ahead and get to that. Let's go back to one of the paintings right here. Now, at first, I thought this knight was Sigurd, but we actually have to go back in the story a little bit further to Sigurd's father, Sigmund. Now, I'm going to briefly, talk about these guys so you can get a good understanding. But if you do want to know more, I'm going to have all types of links in the description, telling about each one of these characters, the entire story. You can even hear an audio story that's really interesting about Sigurd. So to cut right to the chase, Sigmund was a king. He is Sigurd's father, and Odin, when they're having this feast, for a wedding, so Odin had this sword and he put it in a big tree trunk, just stuck it in the tree trunk, and he said, whoever can pull the sword out of the tree can own the sword. Basically some King Arthur shit, where the sword is stuck in the stone and, no one can pull the sword out except for, Arthur, who, then became the king. So basically, kind of just like that story, everybody tried to pull this sword out, and the only person that could pull it out was Sigmund, who was also already a king at the time. Now, the name of this special sword was Gram, and in Old Norse, Gram means wrath. Does that sound familiar at all? Wrath of the ancients. So at this wedding where Odin, put the sword in the tree trunk, it was actually Sigmund's sister getting married to King Sigurd. Now King Sigurd, he couldn't pull out the sword. He was really envious of Sigmund. He really wanted the sword. He offered to buy it. Of course, Sigmund said no. 3 months later, Sigurd invites, Sigmund and his whole family over, 3 months after the wedding to his place. And Sigurd, wanting the sword, killed Sigmund's father, King Volsung, and then went ahead and captured him and all his brothers. Now King Sigurd, he was pretty evil. This was really about Sigmund and his sword. Instead of just killing Sigmund and taking his sword, he tortured him instead. Each night he had his mother that could shapeshift into a wolf kill one of the brothers every night, for 8 straight nights in a row. And then on the 9th night, King Sigmund knew that he was last, to die by the she-wolf. And he was actually able to bite off this wolf's tongue. And then he was able to escape out of his bonds. He went and hid into the forest. And here's where the story gets really weird, if it's not weird enough already. So Signy, who is Sigmund's sister, the one who is also married to King Sigurd, she's really upset with her husband for what he did to her entire family, her father, all of her brothers. So she sends her sons out into the wilderness one by one to be tested, and she urges Sigmund to kill them. So Sigmund starts killing these children till one day he refuses to continue killing innocent children, until one day she disguises into a vulva, which is a wand carrier or a carrier of a magic staff, and conceives a child with her brother Sigmund. Now Sigmund stays out in this woods. Instead of going back to his homeland being the king, he really wants to get revenge on Sigurd for what he did to his entire family. So he builds a house in the woods underneath the land, an earth house, so that it's well hidden. And he stays out there, for 10 years. Then him and his sister's kid, when he becomes 10 years old, Sydney sends him out to Sigmund and gives him the same test that their other 2 sons were given, and their son passes this test. Now the name of their son was Sin Fajotli, or Fatella in Old English. We're just gonna call him Sin for short. So neither Sydney or Sigmund told Sin that Sigmund was his father. This whole time he thought King Sigurd was his father, and Sin knew exactly what King Sigurd did to the Volsung family, and they didn't tell him that Sigmund was his father because they didn't want him to get upset, and out of anger try to take revenge on King Sigurd out of rage. So Sin constantly went out and visited this man in the forest. He didn't really know who he was or understand much about him, and they became good friends. Only Sigmund knew that was his son, and Signy knew, of course. So Sigmund wanted to train, and toughen up Sin to get him strong enough to help him get his revenge on King Sigurd, to avenge his entire family, his father, all of his brothers. So Sigmund and Sin, they start hanging out every day. So, they hang out in these woods, and Sigmund, is training Sin how to fight, and they constantly kill any man that goes into the woods and, take their money. This is one way, Sigmund, is able to survive out in this woods, and, Sin is helping him, and it's a good way to keep people out of these woods, too. Anyone that goes in those woods, they die. Now, a certain amount of time goes by and they find this certain house. Then these 2 men are, really wealthy, and they have gold rings on in their sleep. Now they're also sleeping in wolf skins. So Sigmund and Sin go ahead and kill these wealthy men and take everything of value that they had. So Sin and Sigmund grab these rings, and they don't realize that they're magical rings. These rings allow them to change into a wolf. Now that sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? That's exactly how King Sigurd's mom was able to turn into a wolf. Well, now they find these 2 rings that allow them to turn into wolves. Now they're able to do their killings in the woods a lot faster, because now they're wolves, and they go their separate ways. And as soon as they see men, they're supposed to howl for each other, and then they come running and they help each other, as wolves kill these men. They had a golden rule, if there was more than 7 men, to make sure to howl so the other one could come running. And one time Sin took on 11 men at one time, in his wolf form. And, Sigmund was pretty mad about this. They had a rule saying any more than 7 men, to call him. Sin had no problem taking on the 11 men by himself as a wolf, but Sigmund was still pretty upset for breaking this rule, for not listening to him, and he ended up biting Sin, as a wolf, ended up biting him in the neck. So, Sin was injured pretty bad. He just got bit in the neck by a wolf. Now, Sigmund saw a raven that was carrying a special healing plant. Now, the story doesn't say this, but I really do think that the raven is one of Odin's ravens. This raven came out of nowhere, and Odin does have 2 ravens that fly over the earth and give him information that he needs needs or wants. So I think this was Odin trying to help him out, just like he's been helping him out all along, giving him the sword and everything. So he was able to get the raven to get a certain herb for him, and he put the herb on his neck and, healed up Sin like nothing was happening, no injury. So that was the end of their wolf days. They went back to the earth house, and they took the wolf shapes, the wolf skins, they threw them in the fire. They got rid of the rings, and they wanted to make sure that no one else could take up this form. They didn't want anybody else to hurt anybody else like that. Now it was time for Sigmund and Sin to go ahead and get revenge on King Sigurd. They went ahead and went into his palace. Now Sydney and King Sigurd had 2 more children after that, and they were playing, and one of the children's toys went and rolled to where Sigmund and Sin were hiding out in their palace, and the little child went and hurried and told his dad, that they're men with axes. And his dad, King Sigurd, half believed him, but he had his guards, go look around and stuff. And Sydney, overheard this conversation, so she went to where Sigmund and Sin were hiding and told them what happened. And she once again told Sigmund to go ahead and kill these 2 children as well. Now, just a side note here, in my opinion, I think, something's wrong with this girl. She's constantly telling Sigmund to kill her children. Something's not right there. I mean, she definitely doesn't like that they're children with King Sigurd, someone that she absolutely hates, even though she's married to him, but still, So basically, Sigmund's response was, I already killed enough of your children. He already killed 2 of her children before, and now she's asking to kill 2 more of her children, and they were just little kids. And Sigmund's like, no, I can't do that. I already killed enough of your children. I'm not killing any more children. And with that being said, Sin went ahead and drew his axe and killed both children on the spot. Now the guards did find them and capture them, and they locked them down in the dungeon, and Sydney knew exactly where they were, and she found and hid Sigmund's sword near them in with the meat hidden in the straw. Now, as I mentioned before, this sword, the Graham or the Wrath, was a very powerful sword, and they both used it. They were tied and locked up, but together they were able to use it to saw through the stone, saw through the iron, break their shackles and get free. They did this in the middle of the night. They went ahead and set fire to the entire palace, making sure that Sydney was safe as well. They were on the other side of the fire, and then they were confronted with King Sigurd, while he was in the burning palace, and that's when Sigmund told him that, Sin was actually his son that he had with his sister, and that he killed all of King Sigurd's kids, and the Valsung family is gonna live on. Now Sydney, she was on the other side of the fire with Sigmund and Sin, but she has had this huge amount of guilt for letting Sigmund and Sin, kill all of her children, for telling them to kill her children, and for being married to King Sigurd for all these years after he slayed her entire family. She has had this huge amount of guilt on her, and she gave her brother and her son a kiss, and then ran back into the palace, into the fire to die. And so everybody in the palace died. Sydney, King Sigurd, all King Sigurd's men, and the rest of his family. Then King Sigmund and Sin, they went ahead and got a crew together, took the journey back home, where everybody thought King Sigmund was dead, and he told the story of everything that happened. And King Sigmund went on to fight many more battles, and his legacy was told for many years. He was a very famous, legendary king. Now if we go ahead and we take a look again at this picture, that is Sigmund sitting there with his sword, the Graham, that he got from Odin, also known as the Wrath. And those 2 wolves aren't actually sitting there. Those aren't actually his wolves. Those wolves represent him and his son Sin Vajati. And the reason for this painting, why the wolves are in there, is when you hear of the legend of Sigmund, his entire family was murdered by a wolf, person that transformed into a wolf. And then Sigmund himself was able to transform into a wolf, and his son. So he had everything to do with wolves, and that sword that he's carrying plays a huge part of everything, the Wrath. And we can't forget that Odin gave him that sword. I already said that, but that's so important. Every single one of these paintings have something to do with Odin, and that's the biggest thing that stands out in this painting. Now that was a huge long story just to tell the story of one painting. painting, and you can just imagine, the other 3 paintings are the exact same thing. There's a huge story behind each and every painting. All 4 paintings tell a really, really long story. The next one, I'm gonna get more into Sigurd and him slaying the dragon. Extremely cool story. It's gonna be a great video. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you guys do subscribe so you can see that video. If you haven't pressed that like button, make sure you press that. I spent a lot of time on this video. I actually read the entire Valsanga saga, and the way it's worded is extremely weird. So trying to understand everything that it actually said was, a huge complication. I had to go look at a lot of other stories, a lot of other writings, about this story, to really fully understand it, and read the entire story itself to understand every little detail. Just a huge amount of work. So if you can just press that like button, I really do appreciate it. Definitely look forward to my next couple videos coming out about this. It's gonna be really awesome. I do want to thank you guys so much for watching my video, and you have a great day today.